Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, the channel about making a computer role-playing game using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. So far, I have mostly been using links as the method by which the player tells the program what they want to do. That is the default way that Twine works. It presents you with a list. When you being a player, it presents you with a list of options, and you click the one that you want, and that's how you choose. I have had pictures as effectively links. So instead of having a text that describes the choice, I've had, for example, a picture of an elf, a dwarf, a troll, and a human, and then you click on the picture that you want. Or I've had arrows indicating direction and speed, and you click on the one you want. But they're all variants on sort of having a bunch of links and you click on them. I have occasionally had text input. In several of the early videos, I had a situation where the player character might get asked a riddle, and they, instead of having a list of possibilities, they have to type in what they think the answer is. Because having a list of possibilities would be too easy to work out what the answer was. But I haven't really explored that as a main method of making decisions in the game. In other words, I haven't had a game where it describes the situation and then you, as the player, type in what you want to do. And that's the way a lot of older computer games worked. You would type in "go north," and then it would say, right, you go north and you're in a new location. There's a lamp here. Okay, get lamp. Right, the lamp is now in your inventory. Then you could drop lamp. And there might be other more specific commands that worked in particular situations. So, for example, press button might work if you're in a particular room where there's buttons to be pressed. There might be specific commands that require particular items. So, for example, turn on flashlight might only work if you have picked up a flashlight item previously in the game. But the player has to work out what the commands are. They're not presented with a list and get to choose from that list. So in this video and in videos to come, I would like to explore the idea of having a game where the method of making decisions for the player is by entering text. And I'd like to start with the very basics of that, which is how do you have a text window? I have already dealt with that in passing before, but it's worth going through again. How do you have a text window? And how do you get the computer to process what you've entered and change the game accordingly? So here's an example of a. It's not an example of a complete game by any means, but it's an example of a text window. It says, "What do you do?" And you can enter what you want. You could say "look" or "walk north" or "lie down" or whatever it may be. And if you do, for example, "lie down," which is not the program has a list of verbs which it recognises, and if you enter something that isn't in the list, you just get a message that says essentially, well, I don't really know what that is. So, for example, if I was to put "lie down" and I enter, it says detected no verb. Whereas, because I have got directions in a list, if I put north, for example, and enter, it will say that it detected the verb north. So all I'm going to do in this video is show you how to have a text box and how to have a system for detecting the command that the player is trying to enter. And then in subsequent videos, we'll move on to how to make meaningful changes to the game based on that command. So let's X out of that. Oops. Let's X out of that. The first thing I want to show you is where this is in the zip file that you can download from the link in the description. I've made a separate folder for it, so it's not in supplementary material, which is where I put most of these little demonstration mini programs. I've made a separate folder called text input, and when you click into there, it's in there, and it is also called text input. So let's have a look at what I've done. As always, the first thing I've done is this little bit of JavaScript config, so capital C and then lowercase onfig dot passages, passages dot nobr equals true semicolon. Config.passages.nobr equals true. What that does is it allows me to put line breaks in the program which are not telling the computer to put line breaks on the screen. I find it much easier to follow what I've done if I've got lots of line breaks and everything's nice and spread out. But by default, the Twine will take all those line breaks as being an instruction to itself to put a line break on the screen. So that little bit of JavaScript tells it not to do that. Just ignore all the line breaks. That has the downside that when I want to do a line break, I have to specify it with this. Oops. I'll just trying to zoom in there. There we go. I have to specify it with this command here, which is less than br greater than. It will take that as an indication that it should print a line break. I always do that. I don't always mention that I've done that, but I always do that, and because otherwise you either get line breaks that you don't want, or the code is very cramped and is a little bit difficult to see what you're doing. So here's what I've done. Let's look at the text box first, although that isn't the first page in the program. But this is probably the easy bit. So I say, what do you do? And then we have that line break indicator that I talked about before. And then we have this command, text box, a fairly simple built-in command which just allows tells the program to create a text box, allow the player to type in whatever they want, and then when they press return to process it. So it is less than, which indicates that it's going to be a command that's specific to Twine as opposed to being JavaScript or HTML or CSS. Text box, so TEXTBOX, space, quote. Now, remember these quotation marks because they're not... the way this works, or the way this is laid out, isn't quite what you'd expect, because we have quotation mark, dollars, ACTION, so action, and then another quote mark. Now, that is telling you that the text that the player enters, put that text in the variable dollars action. And normally when we type the names of variables in Twine, we don't have quotes around them, but in this particular case, it does require those quotation marks around it. So bear that in mind. So text box, and then a space, and then the name of the variable in quotation marks. In this case, it's action. Now here I have two quotation marks, so a sort of empty text. That is telling you what text to put in the text box by default. So I might have had something like enter your command here, or something like that. So quote, enter your command here, unquote, instead of having this what do you do, or I might have put what do you do in the text box instead of having this line up here. But I decided not to. I decided to have no text. You do need to put those 2 quotation marks because otherwise I found that when I didn't have those 2 quotation marks and I did have the next part, which is a link, it didn't quite do what I wanted. So bear in mind those 2 empty, that sort of empty text there to indicate that there's no starting text in the text box. And then we have a link. We have square bracket, process action, which is just the name of a page within Twine, and then end square bracket, and then we have greater than. And so the fourth part of this is saying when the player is finished entering their text and press return, we go to the page named process action. So in short, it's saying start a text box. The stuff that the player enters into the text box we're going to put into the variable action. Don't have any text in the text box to start with, and once you've put the text string into the action variable, then go to the page process action. So what happens in process action? Well, what happens in process action actually requires knowing what we've done in this first page, initialize. So let's go to that first. What I've done is I've created an array. The elements of the array are all text, and it is a list of all possible verbs. Now, when we're doing games that rely on text input, at its simplest, you definitely need a verb, and sometimes you also need a noun, depending on what the verb is. So, for example, let's go through this array first. So we have less than, set $v, which is just the name of the array, equals square bracket, and then I've got quote null quote, because that is the 0th element of the array, and I always find it easier to work starting from element number 1. And then I've got a list of possible simple commands. So I've got all within quotes. So I've got north, south, west, east, inventory, invent. That's a common abbreviation for inventory. Inventory just means list every item that the player character currently has. Attack, fight, well, they're often synonyms. Sometimes you have the option of attacking non-player characters that you meet in the game. Talk, and then look. Look is another common command that means give me the description of where I am again. The reason for that is that sometimes you'll forget because you've done a few different things. So you might say, right, you're in a cavern and there are tunnels going to the north, west, and east, or something like that. And you say, all right, get flashlight. No, that doesn't work because it doesn't recognize the word flashlight. Okay, get torch. Okay, use torch. Right, you turn the flashlight on. Get sword or something because you know that you need a sword. And then by that time you go, hang on, I can't remember where the tunnels are. So look will just give you that description again. It'll say you're in a tunnel you're in a cavern and there are tunnels going north, west, and east. So that's a list of all possible verbs. Obviously, a game that only had these verbs wouldn't be much of a game, but this is the sort of, I suppose, just a very simple starting array, and that has all the possible verbs. We're going to have another array, which is, we're not going to have an array for nouns. We're going to have a separate array for items and characters, but they will work in a very similar way. So I've just done the one array to start with to make the explanation as simple as possible. We have this array. We set up this array. We go to the input page, which we've already discussed, and then we go to process action. And in process action, we're going to deal with the V the V array, and it's fairly simple. So we set Y to quotation mark, in other words, to an empty, to a text string that has 0 characters. And then we look for a verb. And so we've got a for loop of a kind that I've used many times before. For $z equals 1, semicolon space, $z is under or equal to v.length minus 1, or $v.length minus 1, which is to say the number of commands in the V array. It's easier to do a variable name .length minus 1 rather than have a number, because then every time, if you have a number, every time you add or delete a command to the list, you have to change the number. Whereas with doing it this way, I can just alter V and it'll automatically go through the right number of slots. $z plus plus. So what all that means is go through go from 1 to X, where X is the number of commands listed in the V, or the number of verbs listed in the V array. Now, you'll remember that the text that we entered was put in the variable action, $action. So if $action dot replace bracket V square bracket $z n square bracket comma quote xxx quote n square bracket exclamation mark equals $action, then we do a certain thing. So what does that mean? Well, dot replace is a command which is what you might think. It is going through a text variable and finding the first instance of a particular letter or character or sequence of characters, if there is one, and replacing it with something else. So in this case, we're looking for any instance of $v square bracket $z n square bracket, in other words, the zth element in the V array. So it might be something like west or look or examine, something like that. And we're replacing it with quote xxx unquote. Quote xxx is not anything significant. It just means it's just something to change it to, and you'll see what I mean. So if this thing, all of this thing that I highlighted, what that means is v.z, sorry, it's the variable action, but we've replaced look or west or whatever it may be with xxx. If that doesn't equal $action, then we do something. Another way of saying that is if the string $v $z is present in the variable action. So in other words, let's say the player enters something like look around, or look at the cave wall, or look at my surroundings. All of those, when the loop gets to look, this whole thing will be true, because it will say, okay, $action, which is look at the cave wall, let's say, dot replace, replacing all instances of look with capital X, capital X, capital X, does not equal action. Well, action dot replace VZ XXX will be something like XXX at the cave wall, or XXX around, or XXX at my surroundings. And that will be different to $action, which is look at my surroundings, or look around, or look at the cave wall. So it will have noticed that the string contains that particular command, and then we set Y equal to $v $z. In other words, Y, in this particular example, Y would become the string look. So we make that test, and then whether or not that test is activated, whether or not the command within that if element is activated, it just says /4. In other words, go through this loop some more, add 1 to Z, and continue as long as z is less than or equal to v dot length minus 1. One consequence of that is, and I've made a little note to myself here as well, if the user enters more than one verb, the program will go with the one which is latest in the array. So for example, let's say it said look north. Y would first be set to north because north appears first earlier in the v array. It would be set to north because it would recognize this if would recognize that the word north is in $action. But then later, as it went through the loop, it would also recognize look, and it would then just set y. It would overwrite the previous value of y and just set it to look. And so you would end up with it treating it as if you'd typed in look, which in that particular case I think is probably correct. But if you type in more than one verb, sometimes you might get a result that isn't what you, as a player, expect. So to sum up what this does in sort of plain in sort of English terms, it's saying go through every possible command that I've listed in the v array. If that particular command is present in the variable action, $action, then set the variable y to be equal to that command. And then once it's gone through that loop, and this particular bit of code I've put testing only because it's just for demonstration purposes. In a real game, you wouldn't print that you've detected the verb y. You would do things based on what you've detected. So, but that is for the next video. So if y equals, which means if y is equal to quote, in other words, if $y is equal to an empty string, which is what it is at the start of the page, so it will be equal to that if it didn't detect any verb in this loop. If y equals quote, then print detected no verb, else print detected the verb $y. Now, of course, what would really happen is it wouldn't say detected the verb north. For example, what it would do is it would say if y equals north, then go to the page that moves you north, right? Or if it equals north, southwest, or east, then go to the movement page and process that command, which would be something like see if the player can move north, if there's an exit to the north where they are, and if so, move them to the next place. If y is inventory, then go to the inventory page and print a list of everything that the player character has picked up. If it's attack, then go to the attack page, which will see if there's anything to attack and then process the results of attacking, and so on. But that's what we'll get into in future videos. All I wanted to demonstrate in this video is how you extract relevant text from what the player has typed in and pressed return, because of course you need to do that in order to change anything about the game state based on what the player wants. So that is the beginning of how to have a sort of text input based game instead of a links input based game. I'm going to continue with how we will process y, how we will make the player do things and get things and drop things and attack things and talk to things and all of the things that a game requires in future videos. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.